Okay, I made a mistake. The first one that I read was the preface. This is now chapter 1. Golden Medina means golden land. All along the rail there were faces. In the portholes there were faces. Leeward, a stale smell came in from the tubby steamer that rode at anchor with the yellow quarantine flag drooping at the foremost. "I'd give $1,000,000," said the old man, resting on his oars, "to know what they come for." "Just for that, Pop," said the young man who sat in the stern. "Ain't it the land of the opportunity?" John Dos Passos, Manhattan Transfer. Chapter 1. I was born in Yano, a white Russian village near the Polish border, on the second Sunday before Passover, April 16th, 1900. Isidore, my father, was a tailor, a talkative, temperamental man with big ideas and a correspondingly large sense of his own importance. In his eyes, as in the eyes of the village, a wife's place was either in the kitchen or in childbed, and Sarah, my subdued, self-effacing little mother, alternated uncomplainingly between them. I was the eldest of their 9 children. After me were to be born 1 girl and 7 boys. By Yano standards were well off. Our house was large and airy, standing in a big yard. There were vegetable and flower gardens and a barn for the sled horses and the cow. The house also served as headquarters for father's fine custom tailoring. During the day, the living room doubled as the fitting room, and at night, the adjacent cutting room became a dormitory for Pavel, father's appearance, and Katrina, the Polish peasant girl who was our maid of all work. When I was a year old, my father set off on the first of many odysseys which have punctuated his life. He must be, I've often thought, a lineal descendant of the wandering Jew. This first voyage took him to America, called by the villagers Golden Medina, the Golden Land. Though he was gone only a few months, it was long enough for him to become an authority on all things American. In the course of the next 8 years, he made 3 more trips to Warsaw, to Berlin, and to New York again, and became an authority on everything. His journeys never seemed to take him anywhere in the neighborhood of the pot of gold, but they did provide him with material for travel logs, which he had no scruples about spinning out to soap opera length. As not more than a dozen people in Yano had ever even been to Pinsk, always was sure of an audience. Maybe that's why he came home. For the most part, his tales were listened to with open-mouthed attention and duly swallowed whole. However, on one occasion, the villagers, incredibly touched off a top-blowing which had repercussions permanently disturbing the peace of our household. Reporting on the wonders of the Golden Medina, father described a new invention called the telephone. But when instead of oohing and awing, the audience reacted with winks and knowing looks, his collar began to sizzle, but he swore he'd show 'em. He'd build a telephone. Alexander Graham Bell had nothing on my pop. The next day he installed an iron pipe leading from the living room to his bedroom on the 2nd floor, and after a couple of test tales, summoned the skeptical citizenry to see or hear what Adler had wrought. Although the telephone never really caught on in our house, at least it had come to stay. From then on, father spent much of his time in bed, following orders down the pipeline like a ship's captain, as he had a sonorous and flexible voice, which the speaking tube amplified to foghorn volume. Even a placid request for a glass of tea took an apocalyptic overtones. When he was excited or angry, the sound effects could be barely appropriated if an unusually amorous bull, amorous bull moose were compelled to sit out opening day of the mating season. Mother was the only one who ever answered the telephone. Neither Pavel nor Katrina wanted any part of Pop's intervention. If Katrina were anywhere near the pipe outlet when he started to broadcast, she would throw her apron over her head and plunge blindly toward the nearest exit, caroming against chairs and tables, and more often than not, leaving the door flew open with my little brothers, who had to learn early either to dive for safety or be bowled over like so many ninepins. After Pavel, who would stand cowering until the commotion subsided, then trot out to the hall and call upstairs requesting a playback. He could not, he claimed, understand a single syllable that came out of the speaking voice. Father, who did not take kindly to criticism of his invention, declared that Pavel was, among other things, a poltroon with wax in his ears, and went right on running the household by phone. It was, after all, his nickel. I have inherited many of my father's traits: his restlessness, the quick temper, his adventurous and inquisitive spirit, his stubborn refusal to be satisfied with second best. It seems to me that at quite early age I began identifying myself with my father. If identifying is meant preferring a role in a life which would not confine my horizon to the boundaries of Yano, or limit my activities to cooking, sewing, scrubbing, and childbearing, I did not want to be the perpetually acquiescent one, forever overshadowed and pushed into the background. I wanted to get out and see the world and mingle with people and to have my say about what went on. As long, almost, as I can remember, I have been driven by a fierce desire to get an education. By the time I was 12, all my hopes and plans for the future hinged on my winning a scholarship to the gymnasium at Pinsk. I knew I was starting with a couple of strikes against me, since only one scholarship was available to the Jewish children in Yanal, and custom decreed it should go to a boy. But I screwed up my courage and sought help from the most learned man in our village, the rabbi. Every day, after school, he tutored me in Russian, Hebrew, history, and mathematics, and at the end of the year's intensive cramming, my head was so bulged out with knowledge, it's a good thing I didn't own a hat. I wouldn't have been able to get it on. With the temptation to say that hard work and persistence paid off, and that as the villagers cheered and the family wept for joy, I was handed the scholarship. Who is going all the way to Yano just to make a liar of me? By Rasputin in person. She was handed her scholarship by Rasputin in person. But the truth is, I never did know I made out, for when prize day came around, I had already traveled many miles along a road which did not lead to Pinsk. My father, who was always toying with the idea of transplanting family to America, finally had hit the plan of sending us over in installments, and when he heard that a cousin of ours was about to set sail for the Golden Land, I, as the eldest, was elected to accompany her. A husband's word, of course, was law, and my mother's heart, her protest that I was only a baby, cut no ice with father. At first, I was upset at the thought of leaving a home, but once I grew used to the idea, I was excited and eager to be on my way. After all, it wouldn't be long before we were all together again, at least so father said. And I tried to comfort my mother by reminding her of this while she packed my belongings in a potato sack, the Yano substitute for a Vuitton trunk. Further took me to the next town, which was on the railway, and after embracing me solely, turned me over to the travel broker and departed, probably fearing that if he hung around to see me off, he might succumb to his chronic wanderlust. Once I was put aboard the train, I promptly fell asleep. Not that I was blasé about traveling, but it had been a long day, and when I broke, I found my cousin sitting beside me. She was a pale, sad-eyed woman with an air of mournful abstraction, a character, though I didn't think of it that way then, right out of Chekhov. However, unlike most of Chekhov's characters, she appeared to have taken a vow of silence. So after a while, I gave up my attempts to be sociable and devoted the rest of the journey to looking out the window. Since there were young men in our group who had not done their military service and would have been turned back by the border guards, we left the train at Danzig and sneaked into Germany through dark, muddy tunnels. The tunnels were scary, but we were in no danger, as the travel broker had paid the necessary bribes when he arranged our passage. Emerging in Germany, we boarded another train and went on to Bremen, our port of embarkation. Travel there was all bustle and confusion. So many papers to show and questions to be answered. I was more exhilarated than frightened, but my cousin became increasingly confused and at last broke down completely. "I'm afraid," she wailed. "I cannot go to a strange land. We must ask the official for permission to go back. You ask him, Pearl. You're little. He won't be angry with you." When I saw it was useless to argue with her, I made a first adult decision. Let my cousin go back. I'd go on. I went over to the immigration officer, turned on the tears, and talked him into giving me a re-entry permit, and one only. Then I marched back to my cousin, thrust it into her hand, and told her of my determination to go to America. Though she put up a token of resistance, the one thing on her mind was getting the hell out of there and back to Russia. So it wasn't long before she kissed me goodbye and went her dim and distracted way. I sailed that night on the ship Naftar. Being the youngest passenger, I rated penthouse accommodations. The top bunk, which served both as bedroom and dining quarters. The food service in Stiergrad was not as good as we have our animals back in Yano, and I thought how lucky it was my mother had tucked 4 loaves of black bread, 4 salamis, garlic, and apples into my potato sack. My fellow passengers, all going to seek their fortunes in the Golden Land, were a mixture of nationalities: Russian, Polish, Danish, Swedish, and Italian. Since the voyage was very rough, nearly everyone was seasick, but not me. It was my first taste of freedom, and my spirits were high. I would stay up most of the night, snacking on salami and singing Russian folk songs, to the annoyance of my ailing shipmates, who were quite often rewarded my vocalizing with a cussing out. But when the epidemic of seasickness subsided, they made a pet of me, and for the rest of the voyage, I had it, as the saying goes, good. The climax of the trip came one morning when everyone rushed to the rail and began screaming and waving. I was certain that we were sinking and stayed where I was, too frightened to move. Then one of the men grabbed me and set me up on his shoulder. "Look," he shouted in Yiddish, "the American lady, the Statue of Liberty." And in a moment I was shouting as wildly as the rest of them. We had come to the Golden Land. End of chapter 1.